afternoon. My name is Terry Almanza. I am retired from the Chicago Police Department Gang Investigations Unit in May 2020, with 27 years on the job. I am also the founder of Drug Induced Homicide.org, a non-for-profit organization supporting our judicial system and bereaved families advocating for justice in the lethal poisonings of our loved ones. I want to first extend my deepest gratitude to Chief Deenihan and the Detective Division for implementing the Drug Induced Homicide Special Order, which outlines the procedures of investigations, responsibilities related to suspected drug toxicity deaths. I am honored to be given the opportunity to speak on this topic, which is very near and dear to my heart. Prior to the current administration, drug toxicity deaths were classified as non-criminal and typically closed without any investigation. Nothing in life can prepare a parent for the day in which they receive notification that their child is not breathing and that all life-saving measures have been exhausted. I'd say the next closest traumatic event in comparison to burying my daughter Sydney was fighting for justice in her homicide. On May 31st, 2015, my husband John found our 18-year-old daughter Sydney lying lifeless across her bed. Sydney had ingested a lethal amount of MDMA that she had bought from 2 local drug dealers in anticipation of attending the Bonnaroo Music Festival the following week. I immediately checked Sydney's call history and Safari searches, identifying the persons responsible for her homicide. But her case was closed immediately and classified as non-criminal. How could this be? How could someone give my daughter an illicit narcotic and she died, and the drug dealer walks away with no accountability? I researched and identified the Drug Induced Homicide statute, which is simply defined as the unlawful delivery of a controlled substance resulting in a death, a Class X felony punishable with a minimum term of imprisonment of 6 years and maximum of 30 years. I networked with Will County, Lake County, and McHenry County State's Attorney's Office who had success prosecuting drug-induced homicide cases. McHenry County State's Attorney Patrick Keneally sharing that the number of opioid-related deaths have dropped significantly since the prosecution of these drug dealers. This, we truly believe, is tangibly resulting in lives being saved. I once again pleaded with the Detective Division to investigate Sydney's death criminally, but was repeatedly reminded that there was no protocol to investigate her death criminally. I requested that detectives bring in the suspected dealers for questioning, but I was advised that her dealers would never admit to selling a lethal dose of MDMA to her. I refused to accept that her death was nothing more than a tragic accident. I was repeatedly told that Sydney made a choice, but Sydney never made a choice to die. It is not my intention to ever speak poorly of our judicial system, but rather to advocate towards a shift in thinking of law enforcement officers and prosecutors away from past protocols, focusing on accidental, to now classifying these cases as criminal and treating every suspected drug toxicity death as a homicide. Data from the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office reported 5,068 opioid-related deaths in Chicago since Sydney's homicide in 2015, and only 3 cases that I have been able to identify in Chicago have resulted in a drug-induced homicide conviction. 16 months after Sydney's homicide, my pleas for justice were finally answered. Sydney's case was reopened and reassigned to Area 2 detectives Schlater and Velasquez. Suspects Brent Tyson and Cynthia Parker were brought in for questioning, and both admitted to selling 1 gram of MDMA to my daughter Sydney, who they referred to as an inexperienced user. Both were charged with drug-induced homicide, and not surprisingly bonded out. While out on bond, Brent Tyson and Cynthia Parker were charged on a separate case after selling MDMA and LSD to an undercover Orland Park officer. In 2018, I was pleased to announce that Brent Tyson and Cynthia Parker were convicted of Sydney's homicide. Locking up a drug dealer will not bring my daughter back, but I am confident that our efforts will save the lives of others. I am confident that pursuing the persons within the chain of delivery sends a clear and unmistakable message to these drug dealers that anyone profiting from the misery and suffering of an unlawful sale of a controlled substance that results in a death will be held criminally liable. According to Robert Bell, the head of the DEA's Chicago Field Division, deadly counterfeit pills containing fentanyl are now everywhere in Chicago. They're available in street deals, purchased online, in schools. Unsuspecting people think they're getting a pharmaceutical grade pill like Oxycontin, Percocet, and Xanax, and they are dying. More than 9.5 million counterfeit pills were seized so far this year, which is more than the last 2 years combined. DEA laboratory testing reveals a dramatic rise in the number of counterfeit pills containing at least 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which is considered a lethal dose. A deadly dose of fentanyl is small enough to fit on the tip of a pencil. In June 2019, I was contacted by a mother whose son was found deceased in his apartment located in the Edgewater neighborhood, with suspicion of illicit drugs involved. The victim's phone and a detailed journal belonging to the victim and narcotics as well as paraphernalia were left on the scene. I contacted the detective assigned requesting permission to inventory those items and request a phone dump through our CFL. The detective responded that the case had already been closed, but he did not mind any additional steps inventorying and processing the evidence. He inquired as to why I wanted to take these steps. I replied to pursue a drug-induced homicide conviction. He laughed. I'm proud to share that these additional steps assisted in the drug-induced homicide arrest of Christopher Paulus and the homicide of Sylvia's son Josh. This is just one of many examples. I have been in contact with bereaved families all across the U.S. who seek justice and closure in the lethal poisonings of their loved ones. When asked about prosecuting drug-induced homicides, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox related that her focus is on violent crime, and further relating that the State's Attorney's Office doesn't have a policy against drug-induced homicide. It just doesn't get many cases from the Chicago Police Department. For the record, Ms. Fox, it is the illicit narcotics that are funding these gangs, funding criminal activity, selling drugs, providing the gangs with the money to buy guns that are used to shoot at rival gang members, and in many cases shoot at law enforcement officers and innocent children. Last week I was contacted by the family of 2 Fenwick High School graduates that died in September 2021 of suspected fentanyl poisoning in the near North neighborhood. Their cases are currently on hold awaiting toxicology results, which can often take 6 to 12 weeks. Placing these critical investigations on hold. A hair sample of one of the victims tested positive for the presence of fentanyl, but these cases remain at a standstill, waiting on toxicology. Phone dumps, interviews of a surviving victim and witnesses, review of video surveillance, capturing partygoers present, analysis of narcotics recovered at the scene of the crime, and all placed on hold. Why wait? When there is a strong probability that illicit drugs were involved, why not take the necessary steps to immediately build your case, removing these criminals from our streets before they strike again? In my 6 years of speaking with families, law enforcement, and prosecutors, I feel strongly that the cellular phones are often the key to identifying the source of the unlawful delivery. Examining public and private domain, file storage, web pages, and other cloud content can be critical in your investigation. State's Attorney Patrick Keneally held weekly meetings with the state's attorneys that I was invited to sit in on, where attorneys reviewed drug-induced homicide cases, sharing the techniques and strengthening their cases. Whether it was digitally extracting evidence from a phone, tablet, or laptop, running DNA or prints at the scene, checking banking apps, ATM visits, tollway records, recovering and analyzing narcotics and paraphernalia on the scene, retrieving video surveillance and collecting statements of witnesses and potential suspects, by bus and confidential informants. I promise you that the evidence is there. I hope that sharing my story will be a reference for detectives in future drug-induced homicide investigations. But more importantly, I hope and pray that my story saves the lives of someone very near and dear to your heart. Never in a million years did I think that this would be my story.